Verstappen victorious at the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix, as elsewhere, Daniel Ricciardo's blood boils. From RacingNews365.com, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks, who has quite a nice background. I mean, that kind of sums up the dominant man from today, Max Verstappen, on another planet once again.
Yeah, hi everyone from the Shanghai International Circuit paddock. As you can see, pack down going on right behind me. It's a long way to go from here to get all this stuff ready and prepared across for the next race in Miami in 2 weeks' time. As you say, Nick, you can see over my shoulder there, Max Verstappen, the number one. Quite remarkable stat I'm going to give you that Christian Horner came out with post-Grand Prix. Since the last Chinese Grand Prix 5 years ago, Max Verstappen has won 50% of those races. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's a stat. That's stat of the weekend, I think.
That is one hell of a stat to come out with. And it just goes to show just what this guy has been doing to the sport, for the sport in many respects. In particular, these last few seasons in which he's just been all-conquering, all dominant. 19 of 22 Grand Prix victories last year. Could he go even better than that this year? Yes, we know he retired in Australia a couple of races ago. That was his first retirement for 2 years. 24 Grand Prix this season. We've had 5. He's won 4. He's looked imperious in those 4 that he has won. And just a completely in control, dominant weekend in Shanghai from what we've seen over these past couple of days. It could not have gone any better for him and for Red Bull.
And of course, he actually only won by 13 seconds, but it would have been a considerably larger lead had there not been 2 safety cars. And that kind of leads on to our next talking point regarding Daniel Ricciardo, who I do have a feeling we need to stop doing our race predictions, because you said Ricciardo would finish in the points. He ended up retiring, as we'll get onto in a second. I said Valtteri Bottas would score a point. He retired. I also said Hulkenberg would score a point, and he did in P10, but Ricciardo, so unfortunate at the restart of the first safety car, which was required after Valtteri Bottas came to a halt. Quite simply, it was a weird one. Lance Stroll went into the back of Daniel. The rear of his car was simply in pieces. It was a weird one because obviously Lance has received a 10-second time penalty and 2 penalty points, but obviously for Daniel, in a race where points were looking a real possibility, he leaves once again empty-handed.
Yeah, it's one of those little butterfly wing effect things, if you think about it, because everything stemmed from Valtteri's drive going pop on his stake. Because from there, we had a virtual safety car, then we had the safety car that eventually led to this incident going into the hairpin at the Shanghai International Circuit. And as you could see, it was that concertina effect of people braking. I think it started with Fernando, ironically.
It was Fernando, of all people.
There was George behind him, then there was Oscar, then there was Daniel, and then there was Lance Stroll. Apparently, over the radio, I didn't hear it, according to what Daniel said, that Lance had called Daniel an idiot for what took place.
That is being polite, by the way. Let's just say that. That is being polite.
It's just that Ricciardo did not hold back in his comments. Initially, he was going to. He was stood in front of us in the media pen. It was actually just over my shoulder here. And he was going to be a little bit cautious with what he was going to say. And then he just decided to let rip. Basically, he said his blood was boiling. He could not believe that Lance Stroll had decided to come out with such a comment towards him. In fairness to Daniel, before making his comments, he'd actually turned around and watched the onboard of Lance Stroll's camera. And from his perspective, as far as Daniel was concerned, the only thing that Lance should have been doing at that particular point, behind the safety car, behind the concertina cars, was looking at the car in front of him, which was the back end of that RB, Daniel Ricciardo. What Daniel noticed was that Lance took a slight glance in his mirror to his right. That, he says, was enough for him to take his eye off the ball, the eye off the back of that RB, and plough into the back of the RB, which then launched it up into a tilting kind of motion like that. That was enough to cause damage, significant damage to the car, to the floor in particular, which once they got going again, it was quite obvious that Daniel could not continue. The damage was too severe. So I am going to use the exact phrase that Daniel used in the pen to us. When he'd heard Lance Stroll's comments about him, and as I mentioned, his blood was boiling, Daniel used the phrase, "Fuck that guy." He was not happy. I make no apologies for the comment for those people listening. I'm just using the words exactly as Daniel had aired them. He was not happy at all. Aston Martin, in their response, felt that the punishment was harsh. I'm using Mike Crack's exact words there, the words of the team principal. He felt that the stewards had been quite inconsistent this weekend and a little bit, not biased, he didn't use that phrase, but perhaps unfair towards Aston Martin when you consider that Fernando Alonso, post-sprint, received a 10-second penalty for what seemed to be nothing more than harsh but fair racing, plus 3 penalty points on his licence, which has now taken him up to 6 in a matter of a couple of races. And Lance Stroll, a 10-second penalty for him as well for causing the incident with Ricciardo, plus 2 penalty points on his licence. Aston Martin had come away from this weekend feeling just a little bit aggrieved.
For those who are watching this video, let us know in the comment section below if you think the penalty for Lance Stroll was fair. In your view, Ian, do you think it was justified?
I'm going to be honest and say to you, I've not seen what Daniel has seen. I have not had the privilege, as I speak to you now, of seeing the Lance Stroll on board. So I'm going to use his experience, his knowledge, and I'm going to go with what were his thoughts at the time. If he's seen the onboard, and he, as we know, it only takes a split second. You can't keep your eye. Yeah. You've got to keep your eye on the ball. And if Lance did indeed take that look towards his right wing mirror, and then obviously, as I say, took his eye off the back of Daniel's car, that's all it takes in this sport to cause moments like that. So, from my perspective, the stewards have obviously clearly had a look at it. And as we mentioned in our video post-qualifying on Saturday, they have so many more different angles and viewpoints than we do, watching at home or as we do here as media in the paddock.
And it turned into actually a disastrous day today for RB because Yuki Tsunoda later retired from the race after being hit by Kevin Magnussen. But going back to the front of the field, and we spoke yesterday after qualifying about expecting a Red Bull 1-2 and the RB20s to simply breeze away. However, the driver of the day, Lando Norris in P2, split the Red Bulls. So that was some drive by the McLaren driver.
It was excellent. Great performance from Lando. McLaren looked like initially they were going to go with a one-stop strategy. In many respects, the safety car did, of course, play into their hands. They were able then to do a bit of a reshuffle, and that allowed them to execute perfectly the strategy that then undermined Sergio Perez to a certain effect. Christian Horner turned around and said that, but for that strategy, but for the safety car, he is confident that the strategy that they had for both Max and Checo would have landed them that 1-2. But that's not the way it plays out in Formula One. Sometimes the best laid plans can often get thrown out the window, and all it takes is something like we saw today, one blown engine from one blown power unit from Valtteri Bottas. As I mentioned earlier, that butterfly wing effect, and everything then starts to unravel. Safety cars come into play. No 1-2 for Red Bull today, but Lando Norris, McLaren certainly took full advantage, and fair play to them for that. That was a really great drive from Lando. It was well deserved at the end of the day.
And just going through the rest of the top 10, so it was Verstappen who won with Norris and Perez on the podium. Leclerc in fourth with Sainz in fifth. Ferrari a bit disappointing today. I think Lando was surprised at their lack of pace. Have Ferrari taken a slight step backwards, or was it a case of this circuit just didn't suit them as well as the likes of Albert Park, for example, in Australia?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, Nick. Carlos Sainz specifically turned around and said that actually when he was in the simulator looking at this track, he immediately got the impression that it was just not going to suit the SF24 at all. And so it's played out, because we've seen previously that Ferrari has been edging ever closer towards Red Bull. And the expectation was that that would slowly start to again continue, and that they would maintain this upward path, this upward trajectory. But circuit specific, it's just not worked for them. For the next race in Miami, they are expecting to be back on track. They do expect to be much closer to Red Bull than they were here, because this was just not their weekend, not their circuit, that's for sure.
Behind the two Ferraris, in 6th was George Russell, 7th Alonso, 8th Piastri, 9th Lewis Hamilton, obviously started all the way down in P18 with no one behind him, funnily enough, because Logan Sargent started from the pits, something you pointed out ahead of the race to us at Racing News 365. For Hamilton, starting in P18, finishing P9, was that just the best in what was a bad situation for Hamilton?
Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, said that this car is difficult to set up, it's difficult to drive. It's just really not working for them at the moment. It's one of those projects, as we well know, they changed the car over the winter. They knew that what they had over the first 2 seasons under these regulations just really wasn't working for them, that they had to do something. They've tried to do that something. They do feel that this is at least a better platform on which they can work. They've not been able to maximize it at all at the moment. They're still trying experiments weekend to weekend, and that's the best that they can hope for. 3 P9s now for Lewis, plus a P7, plus to the retirement, of course, in Australia. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is his worst start to a season for Mercedes since he joined the team. Toto was asked whether, given this form with the car at present, given the performance that's they're struggling to extract out of it, would Lewis start to slowly become a little bit demoralised and already start to think ahead towards his move to Ferrari? Toto said, absolutely not. Lewis is a pro. He's with us all the way. He's going to give us his everything he's got until the last corner of the last lap of the last race this season in Abu Dhabi in December, which sounds a hell of a long way away right now as we talk about it. He has no qualms about Lewis whatsoever. You do feel that it will come good at some point for Mercedes, but how long is it going to take? Because right now, as Toto admitted, they are struggling. It's just a question of time.
As I mentioned towards the start of the show, Nico Hulkenberg in P10. We speak about the importance of the lower 5 teams making the most of every opportunity. And it seems that this season it's been Haas and particularly Hulkenberg who's made the most of said opportunities. And he did it again today. Haas are looking good for potentially even P6 in the Constructors' Championship potentially.
He in particular is doing a great job. Kevin on the other side of the garage, he knows he's got the car. He knows he can do better with it. Obviously, he had that incident with Yuki Tsunoda today that made RB's race terrible. As we were discussing with Daniel earlier, he effectively took Yuki out. Kevin believed that Yuki had gone wide enough that he was able to cut underneath him, and there was plenty of space. It was just, for him, one of those racing incident things. Didn't feel the 10-second penalty he received for that was fair. So you got a lot of aggrieved teams, a lot of aggrieved drivers coming out of this weekend with some of the penalties that have been issued. But as you say, Nico Hulkenberg just doing a really great job at the moment in that Haas. One of the points that's actually emerged out of this weekend is that there is an F1 commission meeting coming up within the coming days. And one of the points on the one of the subjects on the table that's going to be discussed is, does F1 extend the point system from the top 10 to the top 12? The reason why that is coming to the fore is that quite clearly this season, we've almost got an A league and a B league. The top 5 teams, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, they are quite clearly head and shoulders above the lower 5 teams, RB, Alpine, Williams, Haas, and Stake. So it's not a bad idea when you consider that points are so important to those teams. It means a tremendous amount when it comes to prize money at the end of the season. And they feel that if the top 10 positions, more often than not, if there are no retirements, no mechanical issues, no incidents, then the top 5 teams are always going to lock out the top 10 positions in a Grand Prix. And that makes it then really, really hard for those bottom 5 teams to fight for those lower points paying positions from a Grand Prix. So for them, at least extending it to the top 12, it gives them something to fight for, especially when points are so vital, as I say, with the prize money that's at stake in Formula One. Funnily enough, though, Nick, speaking to a number of drivers post-race and putting this subject to them, there was quite a difference of opinion. Some were really in favour, some suggesting, like Pierre Gasly, for argument's sake, well, no, that's not what it's about. You know, it's Formula One. We know what Formula One's like. We know the way it's going at the minute. You have to either improve or you make the most of whatever opportunities come your way, be it by one of the cars in the top 5 teams retiring. That's just the way it is. On the flip side, Kevin Magnussen feels that the sport should go completely opposite and have points for the entire 20 cars on the grid. Or, should all 20 finish a Grand Prix at the end of a day? So there's a real divide. Similarly, with the team principals, Christian Horner, as opposed to Laurent Mekies, for argument's sake, who I spoke to post-race on a one-to-one exclusive that we'll see bits and pieces coming out of over the course of the next few days. Again, opposite ends of the spectrum. Laurent, obviously, for his team, fighting for it, but within the same family, you've got Christian that's thinking, no, I don't think that's the way to go. So it's going to be really interesting to see if the F1 Commission at the end of the day decides to vote this through.
We've got to mention quickly the Homehero Zhou, who received the biggest roar every single lap, and at the end actually was allowed to park on the start-finish straight and was in tears. We've reported over the weekend how he's never felt pressure like this weekend, but I mean, he didn't score a point, but what a story, what a weekend for him. The first Chinese driver at the Chinese Grand Prix, the first Chinese Grand Prix in 5 years. It was beautiful. That's the best way of explaining it, I think.
That's a lovely word to use, I gotta say, Nick. And
Thank
to
you.
say, boy was in tears, and you've got to feel for him in that respect. He has done so much to raise the profile of Formula One in China. Would the grandstands have been packed the way they were? 60,000 sellout if it was not for him? That's a little bit tricky to say. Without a shadow of a doubt, he had a major influence on ticket sales. Of course, F1 not racing in China for 5 years also would have had a dramatic impact. But I really did feel for him. I think all of us were hoping that he might have been able to have scraped into that top 10. It never really came to him at the end of the day. Just such a shame. But what it's really done for what he has done for Formula One in China cannot be, what's the word I'm looking for here? Cannot be
praised enough. Praised enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a feel-good story without the ending that it probably deserved for him. But without a shadow of a doubt, if F1 was looking at him, they were wanting to be in that car again next year. They were wanting to be driving for Audi in 2026. Imagine Audi and Zhou on the grid in 2026, just how much high profile it's going to be then as well. That would just be so significant. Will he be retained? It's hard to say, but he's still up for me. I like him. I think he's a good driver. Is he elite? Hard to say. Does he deserve his place in F1? At present, yes. Given the nature of that car, I think he's doing a decent enough job to hold his place, certainly for next year, without a shadow of a doubt. I'd be very surprised if he was replaced for next year. 2026 at Audi, though, that's a different matter. You know, being Audi, being a major global manufacturer, they are probably going to want big names in that car. Is Zhou Guan Yu a big enough name for them, despite what he does for Formula One, the presence that he gives Formula One, given the Chinese background, and in particular as well, what Zhou said the other day, that there is no other Chinese driver coming through. Probably won't see one, he'd reckon, for about another 10 years. So he is it for China at the moment. He is their hope. And we just saw the impact he has played over the course of this weekend, that's for sure.
Well, I think if Audi were to sign Zhou, they'd probably sell a few more cars in China. Ian, I think that's a perfect note to end on. For more reaction from the Chinese Grand Prix, be sure to check out next week's racingnews365.com podcast to hear more reactions, thoughts, and discussions about what has been an eventful weekend, from grass fires to Verstappen winning a 58th race. It's had it all, and some rain as well. Ian, get yourself home safely. From myself and Ian, this has been the Racing News 365.com F1 update. We'll see you next time. Bye.
See you next time in magnificent Miami. Sunshine!
It's going to rain now.